Hello and welcome to New Hampshire Housing's presentation of From the Outskirts to Downtown, Taxes, Land Use, and Value Analysis of Upper Valley Communities. I'm Mike Keese, the Workforce Housing Coordinator at Vital Communities. This event is presented by New Hampshire Housing, which is a self-sustaining corporation created under New Hampshire statute with a mission to promote, finance, and support affordable housing for our state. Part of what housing professionals do is to think creatively about policy alternatives that will help us promote housing development and housing affordability. The creation of new homes is an essential part of the Granite State's economic development future. We recognize that Urban 3's approach could have great utility in many communities throughout New Hampshire, as communities wrestle with the questions of how to promote certain forms of land use through their zoning ordinances to achieve the best outcomes. The Urban 3 study analyzed 15 communities across the Granite State, large and small, from the Seacoast to North Country and the Upper Valley. Joe will present the results of this work in the Upper Valley communities of Claremont, Hanover, and Lebanon. This presentation is being recorded, and we'll share the links to the video and presentation with registrants tomorrow. Joe's presentation today will last about an hour, then we'll have time for Q&A. Please enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to as many of them as time allows. Before I introduce Joe, I want to thank our sponsors. We've got a slide that shows Craig Deacham and Associates, the RBC, and TD Bank, RBC Capital Markets. We're really grateful for their support. They've made this possible. I'd also like to take a moment to tell you about Vital Communities. I've got a little slide for that. We're a nonprofit organization. We cultivate the civic, environmental, and economic vitality of the Upper Connecticut River Valley by bringing people together, by bridging boundaries, and engaging our whole community for positive change. The housing program facilitates partnership between residents, employers, towns, and builders so that we can create more affordable places to live in our region. And we have to recognize the 15 communities who are part of Urban 3's analysis. And especially want to thank the planning officials from Hanover, from Claremont, from Lebanon, and the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, who are all in the audience today with us. So title slides next, and we're going to come to our speaker, Joe Minicozzi. He's the principal of Urban 3. Prior to creating Urban 3, he served as executive director for the Asheville Downtown Association. Joe's an urban planner, imagining new ways for us to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard. In 2017, Joe was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Joe, welcome virtually to the Upper Connecticut River Valley. We're glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro, Mike. So hopefully you can all hear me, and let's get into the show. I seem to have lost the show. There you are. So I'm going to go through a lot of information. Some of you all have seen the main show. Some of this will be a repeat. But really quickly, every time I do a presentation on municipalities, particularly when you have multiple municipalities, the analogy that I like to use with folks is to think of your community as having a form of DNA. This is it's actually easier to understand in New England than it is, let's say, in the Sun Belt, because Sun Belt's cities just kind of spring up out of nowhere. But you all have a history, so think of it as I have a history. This is how I started my life, and this is my DNA when I was 3 months old and I had hair, and this is my trajectory that I'm going to be Papa, whether I like it or not. Or more importantly, my parents are probably something I pay more attention to. And I'm genetically Italian. There's not a lot I can do to change that, but my family has a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So my dad had a 7 bypass heart surgery. I don't know what you call that, a septuple. But that's an inherent conflict within me, that I'm Italian and like to eat a lot of food that's really bad for me. But I also have to deal with this heart issue. So these are things that I have to do to plan my growth. I have to eat right, I have to exercise, I have to do those things to lower my blood pressure. And your community is no different. So what can you learn from Nashua or Manchester or Portsmouth, cities that have higher development pressures than you may all experience? But what can you take away from them that are both good examples, but also what's their heart attack? What can you avoid? Really quickly, a little story of why we do what we do. We're from Asheville, North Carolina, which is up in the mountains, actually the other part of the Appalachian Trail from y'all. And it's a little mountain town that essentially died in the 1970s, and pretty much sat fallow forever. And back in the heyday before the Depression, we were the second largest city in North Carolina, and then we just essentially mothballed. And anytime somebody tried to work on the downtown, it was met with local resistance that'll never work here. We're not urban people. We're not Boston. We're not New York. And people lost sight of that this is a pattern of human development that's normal and how we build places that go back, a couple of millennia. It's just we've gotten into this consciousness that this isn't who we are, and it's really not true. I worked for a real estate development company called Public Interest Projects that was started by the man on the left there. His name is Julian Price, where basically he put $15 million of his own wealth into fixing buildings and starting businesses. So 75% of our money would go into the buildings, 25% would go into helping entrepreneurs on the ground floor start businesses, restaurants, bookstores, whatever. So this is one of our buildings before and after. And this was seen as an anathema that no one would want to live in a downtown. And we're like, well, it's a percentage of the city. Yeah, it's a small percentage, but there's still people that want that need. So give it to them. And what we found is that people weren't using data to have a conversation. It was more about how people felt. There was this emotional argument. It wasn't a data-driven discussion. And we've kept on bringing data to the debate. So this is our downtown. We're a $15 million investor in a $100 million downtown. And just by fixing up buildings, because we didn't get a new building in downtown until 2008, that's the latent value that was just sitting there. So we basically, and it wasn't just us, there were other folks that were investing, but the value of downtown grew to 500 million. So a fivefold increase or fourfold increase in value. Now to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, it was actually the city that primed the pump. To make the downtown work, you need a certain level of service of public investment. And what they did is they invested in streetscapes and parking decks, basically making the downtown work by giving the public needs that make an urban environment work. And to show you that, this is Chris Peterson complaining about $26 million of public investment into the downtown for streetscape projects and parking garages. Okay, let's do some math here for a second. $26 million is a lot of money. I'll give him that. But if you invest $26 million into a $100 million asset, and that yields 430, is investing 26 and yielding 430, is that a good return on investment? Of course. So why do we listen to Chris? Why do we let an emotional argument drive a discussion when there's data hiding there? And you're not going to stop Chris. I mean, even if you gave him data, he's got a website now with fire and brimstone. He misspelled charlatans. I think that's pretty funny. This is our mayor getting hit by a lightning bolt. I asked the mayor, I said, is that a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. Everybody's got people like Chris in their community that just are going to go fly off half-cocked on what they think things are happening without understanding what a city is. And a city is essentially a finite boundary of land, is a really big real estate development project that has to cash flow. It has to work. And if actually strip back to our core, our cities are incorporated, much like our real estate development company is incorporated. So if you look up Oxford American Dictionary and see the word incorporate, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So by law, your town, your village, your hamlet, your city, they're incorporated, your county's incorporated, your state's incorporated, our country's incorporated. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show in 2016. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. I'm such a nerd at midnight, I'm looking it up. If anybody wants it, there's the US code down there on the bottom that lists us as a federal corporation. So when I talk to my community here in Asheville, I asked them, I said, so look, Asheville is 6 times the value of Ted Turner is a corporation. Does Ted Turner just look at Facebook and make his decisions? Of course not. Ted Turner's looking at data. He wants to understand how the cash flows operate. He's going to make some tough decisions because you expect that. Well, cities are no different. So we need to understand how the cash flow operates. We need to understand how our land works as a product. So when you talk to farmers, anybody that's got a friend that's a farmer, and you talk to them, they're going to talk in cash flow terms of economics. What's the crop yield per acre, the labor per acre? It's all about economics before they grow their crops. So we should do the same with cities. So this is the streetscape project that the city did. So thank you for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and the street tree. We took this building and from $300,000 value, added a retail, office, and residential upstairs. It's an old JCPenney's department store. The value went from 300,000 to 11 million. That's a 3,500% increase in taxes. So when I present to my community, I ask them, I say, do you have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? Wouldn't you like that? Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. We don't care. Now, this is about building our community's wealth. And that was just sitting here. And the immediate reaction was like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. We've got this Walmart that's $20 million. It's like, yeah, it's double the value if you just take it at that level. But do you realize it took 34 acres with my corporation to make that happen versus our 0.2 acres? So that's really an unfair way of doing a comparison. So let's do apples to apples. What's the per acre yield of our building versus their building? Well, we're hitting it out of the park. We're producing 100 times more taxes per acre versus them. Now, y'all don't have retail taxes. People down here usually go, well, we take the losses in property taxes for the gains in retail taxes. And we're like, really? We could double the retail taxes, they do. We got residents, they don't. We've also got a lot more jobs. So if we just step back and inform our conversations with data and start there, then have the conversation about what's best for you. And oftentimes, sometimes people are just like, you just hate Walmart. You're just attacking Walmart. And I'm like, well, no, you're missing the point. In fact, I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers Conference, which is probably one of the most square conferences I've ever been to. They're super awesome, but they're really, really nerdy. They're just all about the math of what valuation is. This guy got up and presented how cheap Walmarts are. And he did this unbelievable keynote presentation showing spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap Walmarts are. I'm in the back of the room watching this going, this is brilliant. I mean, think about that. In one meeting, he's getting 3,000 tax breaks, basically getting his value dropped for all of his buildings because he's showing how cheap it is. The assessors are agnostic. They can't just make value happen. They want to know what the real value is. So this is actually very good for them because it's being efficient. Now, trained as an architect, I'm having a heart attack because I'm like, how do people not care? So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he quite honestly shot back. He goes, 15, maybe 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another building and depreciate it down again. The buildings are insignificant for us. It's more about the delivery of goods and services that we're just selling stuff. The buildings are throwaway. Okay, so it's your corporation, right? Their commitment to you is 15, maybe 20 years, which is the life cycle of a cat. If that's good for you, great, go for it. This is a joke, by the way. I'm a dog person. But I'm just trying to drive home the point that this is math that drives your community. And as a shareholder or corporate owner of that community, you should understand the cash flow of it and care about it and how it operates. So as long as you're making your decisions with that conscious math, and I realize this isn't complex that I'm doing here, it's 5th grade math. Just start there. So we already do this. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? Could you imagine if I was like, hey, my truck gets 650 miles per tank? Like, you'd laugh at me. You're like, Joe, it's got a huge tank. Everybody's got different size tanks. So we say miles per gallon is how we gauge efficiency. And oh, look at that, the numbers just changed. And we should be driving BMW Asettas. So what we're doing with your model is basically we're asking this question statewide of how do we normalize the data so you can understand the efficiency in productivity of your own community. And that's the basis of our whole work. We've done this all across the country, many different states, 35 different states now. If you take the whole body of data that we have and just kind of jam it together, this is basically how it all works out. For every $1 of county taxes, somebody out in the county, unincorporated county area, is paying to the county in taxes per acre. Their brother and sister inside the town or city is paying about 5 times that to the same county. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall. This is a 2-story building, 3-story building, and 6-story building. And y'all may not have a bunch of 6-story buildings around, but you do have 2- and 3-story buildings. But what's crazy is notice how it jumps up as you start stacking stories on top of itself. That's the value that you get. Or another way of looking at it, again, back to the Walmart, to do less, you pay less. So I don't fault the Walmart for coming in so low because it's a really, really cheap building. It's built at about $50 a square foot. So don't hate the player, hate the game. When you have a tax system based on valuation, there's a perverse incentive to build junk in your community, period. That's how our tax system works. So I want you to also think of a larger question here as we talk as a state in New Hampshire. Is this the best tax system for you? We'll come back to that in the end. So, our firm is, we're nerds. We like to think about data-driven discussions. And one of my favorite models of data-driven analysis is an MRI on my brain or something like that. I can see my brainstem activity in blue versus the creative thought process in green. If we can visualize your brain, can I visualize your community's cash flow as an economic MRI? So we're known for these models. This is Hennepin County, home to Minneapolis. Can you tell where downtown Minneapolis might be? So this is seeing the county-wide metro economics of a place, but also the physical reality of what's happening in the community. So back to Asheville for a second. Here's my county. Here's a big part of the Blue Ridge Parkway right here. So this is Mount Mitchell. This is the tallest mountain east of the Mississippi. This is Mount Pisgah, another part of the parkway. So those two places are non-taxable. So just to be crude about it, don't pay me taxes, I don't care about it, right? So there you go. I got green and low value. I've got purple and high value. So this big purple splotch right here, that's the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. That house is worth $100 million. Pretty powerful value. But I would argue that, it's on 8,000 acres and it's a 180,000 square foot house. There is not a house in our country that's bigger than that. So it's like having the biggest gas tank. Of course, it's going to be a lot of value. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre. And the map just changed, right? And here it is in 3D. So now we can have a conversation about my community and what's producing value. This, again, this is a county-wide model. This is 350 square miles. And I could see not only us in our downtown, I can see my little cousin of Black Mountain 10 miles away. That's its downtown. That's 12,000 people. Its tallest building's 3 stories, but you can see how it's popping up. Now, in defense of my cousins who live out here in Fairview in the unincorporated part of the county, they think they're paying a lot of taxes because, they're popping up bigger than maybe people further out. Got it. But we're producing the wealth of the county in our downtown. They got our county officials were, I wouldn't say they're in cahoots with, but they had a relationship with our state legislature, and they allowed our state legislature to call our city a cesspool of sin. That's the South for you. We're just like, really? How about a thank you card for all the money we produce? So I want you to realize what we're doing is just it's spatial analysis. I know this joke only works for people over the age of 35, but I like the joke anyway. So for you all, we did your whole state as a generalized model, but then focused in on 15 cities. What you see going forward, take it to the next step, drill in deeper, use these models for local decisions. But also this whole, y'all have this whole presentation when we're done with it. Whenever we go into a community, we have to figure out your tax system and how you operate because we don't live there and we have to model it. So what we have is kind of like this is North Carolina's tax system. We're just kind of a dumb system of a market value, a taxable reduction to a tax value. Locally, we times our tax rate and you're done. It's it's called a straight line system. For y'all, you have a bit more exemptions than we do. And then that gets to your taxable value. And then your local tax rate is generally your budget subtracting non-property tax revenue and divided by your assessed value. So you're setting your tax rate based on budgetary concerns and some subtraction, and that's it. I'll use Dover because it's the one that we drilled into. The Dover tax rate is about 2% on 600,000, which yields a tax rate of let's call it 14,000. The county millage rate is a lot lower. So your counties in New Hampshire, I don't want to say it's non-existent, but it is very minuscule compared to when you come down south. You'll see it's flipped, that we typically pay more county taxes than city taxes. But anyhow, the county gets about $780 in taxes. But anyway, we did that to normalize this valuation. So here's total value, and you can see larger parcels. Some of the parcels are actually non-taxable and came in with value. And that was kind of a weird anomaly. We did zero some of them out because they're non-taxable. So this is kind of how it works from a total value, and you see the big parcels, to a value per acre. And then you can start to see, it almost looks like a city map where you can see Concord, Manchester, and Nashua along the 93 line, and Portsmouth over here. And those big black parcels that you see there, you know, and we see this in rural areas where there's areas that it just doesn't show up inside the GIS software. And we know the parcels are there, we know they're paying taxes, but from a data perspective, it's kind of insignificant because it is so rural. It's mostly forestry, or privately held forests, if you will. But anyhow, here's the statewide model. And you know, you can see the lake effect of where properties are around the lake have higher value. But as soon as you get one parcel past those properties, it drops off. You can see the cities of Manchester, Concord, Portsmouth does incredibly well. And again, the coast, of course, ocean. But y'all are over here on the western side, and you can see Hanover pulling up at the edge. And we'll drill in deeper to these as we go forward. But these are the study cities in the sample set. So from a state standpoint, you're about 22% non-taxable across the whole state. We've never done an entire state, so I don't know if this is normal, but for large counties, there's some counties that we've done in the Rockies in California that are basically the size of your state, and they're at a higher level of percent non-taxable, but they're mostly mountainous. These are the zones. We've done the Seacoast presentation. We're doing the Southern Tier presentation tonight, and we'll do the Southwest and Central. If you want to take part of any of these, just follow the schedule, and you can join those shows. And then these are the municipalities inside each of those corridors. And they were generally clustered either by economic cluster. In the case of the Southern Tier, they're all part of the Nashua satellite system. Obviously, the coastal cities have that coastal culture, and for y'all, you're up in the mountains on the Vermont border. So focusing in on you all. I'm just going alphabetically. We'll start with Claremont first as a community. And here's the total value model of Claremont. And you could see the, you know, we just noted some bigger parcels that are popping up with high value when you do total value. And then here's the value per acre. And you can see how they flatten out a little bit. And we'll do this for each of the cities, but basically we just wanted to grab the prime properties. And they do stick up in the model, but they don't stick up higher than what you've got going on in the downtown. It's not as pronounced in Claremont. You'll see that when we get to other cities, it does bump up even more. But again, here's the Sullivan County model with Claremont and Sunapee, a lot of agriculture in and around Claremont and between Newport and Claremont, as you know. So very low value in the productivity. So as a piece of the county, or the state, the county is about 6% of the county's area, 3% of the county's value, or state's value. There's a little bit less than a 1-to-1. This is just basically showing productivity of, it matters more when you get into the city in the county rather than the state, but this is just, we're numbers people, so we like to give you the number anyway. The city of Claremont inside the county takes up 9% of the county's area, is producing 16% of the county's property taxes. It's called a 1-to-2 ratio of productivity, which isn't bad, but it's not exceptional. When you look at the downtown as a piece of the city, it barely takes up any footprint. It's producing 5% of the city's property taxes, which is a 1-to-26 ratio of productivity. That is exceptional. We typically see downtowns producing at a rate of 1-to-6. is an average. So you're about 4 times that. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact that you have a lot of agricultural area that you can clearly see how it flattens out here. And that's something to be mindful of. So I would take it to the next level. Just be aware that as you creep out into the farms and as those farms turn into residential neighborhoods, they really don't add a whole heck of a lot of value compared to the downtown's potency. They add more value than a farm, but the farms enjoy agricultural exemption. That's another number that I would recommend to look at is the agriculture. But as your downtown is a piece of the county, it barely shows up as a footprint. I don't even know what you'd call that, 1 to 2 thousandths of a percent of the footprint. It's about 0.8% of the value. That's a 1 to 47 ratio of productivity. So when we talk to our county officials, this is just something to bear in mind. They should be at the table when we talk about any kind of Main Street project or fixing the sidewalk. You're producing that wealth for the county as well. And that's going to help for those county services. As small as they are, there's still something for your government production. Taxable, non-taxable, your county, Sullivan County is about 23% non-taxable. That's more than average for what your state sample. Your city is about 7%. That's a little on the low side for a city, but you don't have a college or university in it that consumes a lot of real estate. From a land use standpoint, these are the ingredients that make up the city. And just so you know, for all the samples, we're grabbing the key ingredients. So like your single family is averaging, let's call it 900,000 an acre for your average single family. The multifamily in Claremont is less than that. This is one of the few cities where the multifamily is less than the single family. We typically see the reverse of that, and that could be either demand, architectural character, quality. There's lots of things that drive that you can ask those next questions. Then commercial is actually less than both single family and multifamily. So that's something to be aware of. The value there is because the architecture of commercial tends to be, for single use commercial, tends to be really cheap. And also you're wasting a lot of land with parking, which drives down value as well. So just be aware of that's what happens with that commodity. And then your mixed use buildings, you're getting 2 million and peaking out at about 2.6 million. We did have a technical conversation yesterday, and I'd like to point out that peak building probably wasn't a mixed use commercial building back in the day when it was built. So these are something to be aware of with New England architectures. You do have adaptable architectural lessons in your community where they've changed uses over time, but still produced wealth for your community. Those mixed use buildings are highly productive. This is just seeing it on the model. This is putting all of those on a map. So you can see where they are in town. And again, for the commercial and the single family, those are generalized numbers on what your averages are. So we're not just picking on that one house, but in the mixed use buildings, those are specific sites. So looking at the city as a side view is like a mountain profile. This is the tide mark for your city average. It's a very low city average at 26,000. Your commercial is about double that. Your multifamily is a little bit more. Your single family is a little bit more above that, but they're all pretty close to each other. And then you start to separate when you get into mixed uses and your peak. So those are the different ingredients at that level. And to do the same thing for Hanover, obviously you've got Dartmouth College is in there. One of the things that we found, and we had a conversation about this yesterday, is that there are parcels of Dartmouth that do show up as taxable because they have taxable enterprises on the campus. It's difficult to map at a statewide level. We just had to go with what the data was giving us, and we try to make some educated changes. But I would recommend drilling into this. But parts of Dartmouth campus came up pretty hot in value, but really they dropped down because of the value spread over a large parcel. And you could see that the downtown starts to show up here, but you really see downtown when you bring it into 3D. And it's Hanover's downtown is really, really strong. So there it is in the Grafton County, and we have Lincoln over here in Bridgewater out by around the lake. But again, you see the cluster of the Purple Mountain in downtown. So the county is a piece of the state, is about 17% of the state's area. It's about 8% of the state's value. That's a 1 to less than a 1 in value. When you get into the Hanover in the county, it's about 4% of the area. It's about 20%. So that's a 1 to 6 ratio of productivity for the county, the city to the county in production, which is pretty strong. But the downtown to the city is 0.07% of the area. It's about 6% of the value. That's a 1 to 78 level of productivity. This is the highest productivity that we've seen in all of the state sample. This is more productive than what we saw in, let's say, Manchester or Portsmouth. So this is a really strong, you have a really strong downtown, but it's also contingent on your college population to serve that. So it is a cohabitative environment. Your downtown to your county it barely shows up, and you've got about 1% of value, but that's a 1 to 423 ratio of productivity. This is insane. We've seen a couple that are around that in our studies that we've done across the country, but this is by far in a very rare air of downtowns. So whatever you're doing, this is incredible. Learn from it, but also for other communities, you can learn from this as well. And obviously, it's going to be contingent upon what's working with the college as well, but it's working architecturally. Taxable, non-taxable. Countywide, you're showing up at 28% non-taxable. There's huge swaths of forest, as you all know, that take a lot of non-taxable out. Inside the city, we're showing at 11% of area non-taxable, but again, that comes with the caveat that it may take some conversation with your tax assessor about how parcels are mapped. In some cases, we're seeing an entire parcel show up as taxable, but it's really just a little tiny little piece that may be a bookstore or a coffee shop that should be taxable. But that's just a matter of taking this to the next level. But this is your about 11%. Land use types. Here's your single family at about 800,000 per acre. Multifamily at double that at 1.7 million. Commercial is actually very high at 3 million. This is one of the higher ones of the sample set that we've seen. And your mixed use, this is a newer building that mimics older architecture, but coming at 12 million. And this guy here at 39 million. I'll say as an architect, it's a little funky building, but it's crushing it because of its form and density, and probably its location as well in the core area. But that's really high. And here they are on the map, if you will. So looking at the title marks of Hanover, here's the city average at 100,000, single family at 800,000, multifamily at double that at 1.7 million. You start to see it starts to separate at the multifamily, and then commercial jumps up, mixed use, and then your peak at 39 or 38 million. So from Hanover, we bounce over to Lebanon, and again, part of Dartmouth Medical Center is down there, but it's showing up as taxable. It's a very big building, high value on the parcel, but from a taxable value per acre, it drops down, and you start to see the heat of the core in the center of the city there, and you really see it in 3D. And the productivity of your downtown, actually doing exceptionally well in your downtown there as well. And back to the Grafton County and the different areas and communities. Here's Lebanon, and about 3% of the county's area, 14% of the county's value. That's a 1 to 5 level of productivity, which is about what Hanover was pulling. So that's pretty good for your community. The other thing to note, there are several nodes inside Lebanon. There's West Lebanon, there's Lebanon. So you do have this kind of polynodal municipality down there, but we can get back to that in the Q&A. So here's the core area of Old Downtown, its footprint, its area, which is a 1 to 25 ratio of productivity. Now, again, remember, I said that 1 to 6 is about average that we see nationwide. So, you know, we probably should have a New England sample to see how you fit, because this is way over that. This is, you know, about 4 times the level of productivity. And then again, from the county standpoint, it's about 2/1000ths of a footprint to 0.3% of area. That's a 1 to 125. I know it's not as potent as Hanover, but this is still kind of ridiculous from a valuation standpoint. So the lesson here for all of the communities, what's good for Main Street is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county. And that's a lesson that we've seen in pretty much all of the New England, all of the New Hampshire municipalities. Taxable, non-taxable, your county's at 28%, your city's at 13%. And again, you have the airport taking a lot of real estate. So land use types, here's your single family at $500,000, your multifamily at more than double that at 1.2 million. Hanover was at 1.7 million, if you recall. Commercial at about a third what you found in Hanover. Multifamily, you know, pretty good, pretty strong at 6 million and 14 million. And again, this is a freaky modern building, but again, it's the density. Don't hate on the architecture, understand the mixed use and the density, and the skin can always change on this building. I just find it a little bit weird with this. Maybe I'm being a little too sensitive as an architect or something, but anyway, here's the communities and the locations of where we grab the stuff on the map. So from a productivity standpoint, looking at the title marks, you can clearly see West Hanover, or sorry, West Lebanon on this model. Here's the baseline, the city average, single family, multifamily, or commercial, multifamilies above commercial, mixed use, and then your peak. So, you know, obviously you can try to find ways to fill in more around the peaks on both west side and in the core, and try to drive that value up, and be aware of the low level of value that happens outside that. And there's just a trade-off. I'm not going to dwell too much on these next sets. We'll go through them pretty quickly, because it's kind of hard to read all this information in bar charts in a PowerPoint show. This is better to sit down with on a printed out piece of paper. What's probably more important is to find yourself on the slide and see the shape of what we're talking about. There's a pretty big jump when you get to population of up at Concord, and then jumping up into Nashua and Manchester, compared to everybody else is pretty close in range once you get south of Laconia in the populations. When you look at the area, again, these are sort of all over the map. I was sort of surprised to see how small Portsmouth is. I didn't realize it was that small a place, but it is. And again, boundaries, particularly in New England, tend to be boundaries that were set, you know, a few hundred years ago. So they're sort of arbitrary in how they grow. Where when you go west in the state, you tend to have bigger boundaries, because you were, you know, basically filling out a larger rural area, as opposed to the thickly settled towns of the coast. But from a density standpoint, this is probably where it matters more, where you take your area and your population and divide it into each other. And you can just see how dense Portsmouth is. You know, it's a lot more dense, even though it was less population than many communities. And of course, Nashua and Manchester are the big ones, the most dense. So from a peer group population standpoint, there seems to be these natural breaks for these clusters. And then starting at about Rochester is where you start to get into the bigger city populations. So you could rearrange the information and just compare yourself against certain peers. We did a taxable, non-taxable valuation analysis. In Hanover, we know that this is probably not, you know, you have about a third of value, but really one of the things that we don't really dwell on the valuation of non-taxable. How do you put a price tag on Town Hall or the Dartmouth campus? Is somebody going to go out and buy the Dartmouth campus? So even though it's non-taxable and has value, really what's more important is how much of your portfolio do you have in the land area of that non-taxable. So this is looking at setting everybody to 100% of area. How much of your city or community is a non-taxable. So looking over at Hanover, it's actually above average. The average is pulling about 19% non-taxable. Now, what's throwing that average off is Berlin. And to be fair, it's the Jericho Park. Once you just take the Jericho Park off the table, Berlin's pulling average. So really Exeter is the one that's the outlier with the academy and then their preserves that they have in their community. But again, this, I would argue that this could be further refined at a local level, and I would advocate that you continue to do this. We're mashing a lot of information together in this presentation. So this is the total value of each community. So even in Hanover, like for the folks that are online on town council in Hanover, you're on the board of directors for a $3 billion corporation, which is quite impressive. Lebanon, you're at about 2 billion. And Claremont, you're down about 800, let's call it 800 million of value. So even at 800 million, you may be the smallest one in the portfolio that we studied, but it's still $800 million is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of value as a municipality. So again, you should be looking at your portfolio and the way that you deal with your wealth in each of your communities. From a value per acre standpoint, you start to see Claremont step up more than Berlin. So Berlin is less productive than Claremont. Here's Hanover at 100,000, just a little bit above Lebanon at 90,000 an acre. But generally, and you all know this, that the coastal towns tend to drive more value because they're closer to the Boston metro area and also the amenities of the ocean, which drives value in real estate. So you start to see Nashua, Portsmouth, and Manchester as super high values per acre. That's understandable. From a city ratio for your downtown, your city, we talked about this earlier. Here's y'all. So Lebanon, Claremont, y'all are pretty much neck and neck on your downtown ratio to your city's production. And Hanover, as I mentioned earlier, was the prime driver. What was surprising was look at Berlin. Berlin doesn't have a whole lot of value to it, but it's basically maintained its architecture over time, and it still has that density of a downtown and is hence still productive. So it's when you take the buildings down, when you tear a building down and make a surface parking lot, you're essentially draining your value. And people may argue and say, well, Joe, I want free parking. It's like, well, yeah, you're paying for it. So Berlin didn't suffer the growth that a lot of places have, but it also didn't suffer the loss of value because of that growth. Where look at Nashua over here at one of the lowest value ratios, and even Manchester, because there's a lot of surface parking in downtown Manchester. We'll come back to that. From a density standpoint, I mentioned this earlier. Here's the value of Portsmouth on a per acre basis, and then here's its density. So it's really not that dense for the value that it's punching. Now they're suffering other issues because of this, where housing affordability has become a problem. But looking at Hanover and Lebanon, you guys are pretty much neck and neck on your value per acre. But when you look at your density, Hanover is actually less dense than Lebanon by a healthy portion. That's like a third of value of density. So back to this chart that we did earlier. This is the chart that we do for all of our cities. We just went ahead and took your sample for the New Hampshire model, and this is how it looks. So here's single family, here's multifamily. So across the sample of 15 cities, multifamily is more than double single family. Commercial boxes are somewhere in between. The mixed use average is about 8 million, which is a pretty big jump from multifamily. And then here's your peak value across the model. One of the things that we've done as well is that we've kind of clustered a few of y'all to see that each of them, here's your cities. And population-wise, you're pretty close to each other. And from an average value standpoint, obviously Hanover's the higher achiever because they've also got the bigger economic generator in Dartmouth College. The downtown ratios are all still good, even though I know that Hanover's an outlier at 78, but still 25 and 26 are really good. So Claremont's actually punching higher in its downtown productivity than Lebanon. But to be fair, Lebanon's got a couple downtowns going on, or a couple of urban cores where you can see popping up. So it's not just the downtown that's getting that value. So the average, the peak value is obviously a lot higher. You can see it in the model. And looking at maybe some academic towns of saying, okay, well, Hanover's got a college. Well, what about these other places? Well, Keene was one. And Exeter, even though it's an academy, it's just a high school. It's a fairly significant high school that functions more like a college than anything else. And you can see that from a population standpoint, Exeter's actually got more population. Keene's double Exeter. From a taxable, non-taxable standpoint, this is where you can see that Exeter has a lot of land off the tax rolls in both the academy, but also there's a bunch of preserves outside at the edge of town that take land off the tax rolls. But they're getting a higher value per acre. Removing supply doesn't necessarily eliminate value. It basically concentrates the value into other areas. So that's something to be mindful of. You know, sometimes people say to me, they're like, you just don't like parks. And I'm like, no, actually I like them. And I would encourage to make more of them. Just do it by design. Don't just think that, you know, that all of this land's going to be preserved in Hanover because it's all taxable. It's all private. You know, you might be able to walk through somebody's farm today, but that could sell. So just I would have a plan for connecting the public, the park spaces as habitat for bear or squirrel or whatever, and just to maintain that and maybe invest in that into the future, because once it's gone to development, it's gone for good. And then here's the peak values, and obviously you see that in the models of each. So Keene is actually doing better than Exeter in its downtown, even though the average is almost half of average value. For other communities, this is the Hudson, Pelham, Laconia example. I won't go through these because this is, these towns they never really built up a downtowns, and you can see how flat it is. Even though they have tremendous populations, their average values are really low. And then for Lebanon, we put you in a different cluster of, you know, basically traditional New Hampshire place where you have a little main street and you have a village kind of cluster, an independent sort of economic model. So as a peer group, you're pulling, you know, about Lebanon and Claremont, about same population. Lebanon's closer to Hanover, so you're going to get that effect with the kind of the metro population. But Claremont, you can look at Peterborough to see how they're able to get a $12 million peak and a higher average value. So I would say, well, what's Peterborough doing in their community, or what do they have going on? That could be an example to steal from, even though they're half your population. So here's the populations. This is the peak values. Lebanon's got the highest peak and also a significant average value, and that's again due to the proximity to being part of the Hanover cluster of Dartmouth is the epicenter. And then these are the big cities. I just kept them in here just so you can see them. And then here's Concord, Manchester, and Nashua. And to me, I think rather than looking at the numbers, Nashua is doing quite well on the average value per acre. But look at how they're having their clock cleaned on the peak value. And you can see that in the model. They really missed an opportunity of growing their downtown up when they grew up their city. And what they basically did is they filled out their base and didn't add to their downtown the way that Manchester was adding into its downtown while they were sprawling. So as far as history, this is an example I like to use in a lot of cities, but shouldn't come to a surprise to you. But this is Charleston, South Carolina, which is like the Boston of the South. And when I was presenting there, I was like, look, you didn't make the ocean, so you can't claim that value, but this is what humans created here. So they're actually a really old city. They're older than the Declaration of Independence. They have colonial architecture. So we used that as a birthday and only grab buildings that are older than the Declaration of Independence. So this is an old colonial building, and this looks like it's right in downtown Boston or something like that. And built in 1686. Here's a revolutionary getting his drink on. This is an old liquor store, basically. Here are all the buildings in the model. Here they are in plan. So these buildings, there's 21 acres of buildings that are older than our country. This is what they paid in county taxes in 2015. which is quite significant. They paid a city tax. In their community, they have a business improvement district in the downtown, so they pay a downtown tax on top of it. Where out in the county, we have this 21-acre parcel of Walmart, and this is what it paid the same year. So those buildings for over 240 years are producing that high return of value. Now, they always haven't been great, but they've had this ability to reinvent themselves and keep on producing wealth architecturally. That Walmart's not designed that way. So that Walmart's going to be gone in maybe 2025, 2030. So it's on a steady decline downward. It's never going to receive new value until it's gone. So just be aware of that. These are choices that you're making that your tax system is actually driving. So if you tax me less for building junk, I'm going to do that. So just be aware of that and realize that you have these samples. You have old samples, you even have new samples, as in the case of the mixed-use building in downtown Hanover, that is essentially mimicking what you all already know about architecture. And so do that. You have these examples in your community and learn from it. Your average sample is about $8 million of value per acre. Understand that all of these decisions are also urban design decisions, and go into them with an urban design attitude, and you'll see where the problems are. So we're doing a project, this issue came up in Derry. I have a friend that's doing a project in Derry, and here's the city. The project site area is at the kind of just a little bit outside of the kind of at the city's edge. Here's the project site that they're working on, and there's another project coming in across the street in the number 2 there. We'll come back to this. Here's basically the site. So my friend Jeff Speck is designing a site here. The developer for this site asked us to basically investigate what's going on with these properties. So here they are sitting straight across the street. Now you can see that Derry's already got an issue of suburban sprawl going on just next to the site, where you see all these parking lots in this kind of detached kind of way. Those decisions happen small incrementally over time, but they slowly become a death by 1,000 cuts, draining your wealth. That's what's happening at the edge of that. That's what you saw in Nashua, let's say. But here's Jeff. Here's the design for that property. He's basically mimicking an old New England village. Jeff is trained as an urban designer, so it has that kind of feel of this kind of walkable streets, this kind of craggly views on the streets. And here's the plan, where the parking is kind of tucked in and around the buildings rather than having fields of parking. So this is one side of the street, this is the other side of the street. So this is all going through conceptual review right now. So this is a good time to make changes in these drawings. But what's wrong with these drawings? How do we analyze them? So in my world, we do these things called figure grounds, where we just map the buildings and the parking. So let's just analyze these real quickly. Here's the buildings and parkings on Jeff's side. Here's the buildings and parking on the other side. So you may say, well, Joe, it's going to be easy to find the parking here. It's like, yeah, you're going to be paying for it. Let me show you how. So this is the streetscape that Jeff designs. So he uses the opportunity to shape the buildings to shape going through like a village street, where on this side is just, blown out on one side and blown out over here. So, you'll find the parking, I'll say that, but there's basically double the building to parking ratio is double on this side of the street versus this side of the street. And remember, for me, this is all economics. There's design issues, but what happens economically when you take down all of those fields as parking? And we saw this, I mentioned this earlier with Manchester. We mapped all of Manchester's parking in the downtown because they said they had a parking problem. So we said, all right, well, let's just walk 5 minutes from the old factory lofts, and you can see all the fields of parking in red, and all of the arrows are pointing to parking structures. So as you go out of downtown, you start to see how it becomes majority parking. Well, that's a problem. This is how they've used their entire city. Here's their building footprints. Here's their parking. So taking all their buildings and shoving them together, take all their parking and shove them together. This is how they've used their city. This is everything else: berms, buffers, backyards, parks, whatever. This is what you have to pay for. You have to pay for roads. This is where you're getting your money. This doesn't give you anything. So here's the numbers. In Manchester, the average Manchester resident has about 1,000 square feet of building, about 600 square feet of parking. When you pull the value of the buildings, they're pulling about $90 a square foot. When you look at the parking, and this is the best parking lot in downtown on Pearl Street, pulling $1.20 in value. The road's going to cost you $20 a square foot for owning it, maintaining it, fixing potholes, plowing it, replacing it, doing the rehab project, restoration, all of this stuff you have to do to roads. It's going to cost you that in front of the building and in front of the parking. So when you look at the taxes, this is paying 75% less taxes, or sorry, 75 times less taxes than that. Yet your cost is the same. So that is called a subsidy. When you're paying less for the same service, that's a discount. So we give parking, or in Manchester's case, they give parking a 75 times discount for the best parking lot. So it only gets worse from that as you go out of downtown. But looking at this site, the valuation per acre of this property is going to be about 5 million. The valuation over here is about 2.5 million an acre. So this is paying half the tax productivity of that. So when you make this choice, understand what happens economically with taxes, and just, if you can afford it, great. But when you hear urban designers freaking out about parking, this is the reason why we freak out about it. So here's the field, just for the sake of, these are simple analytics you can do. Now again, so measuring this, I was like, all right, well, the parking starts right about at the door of this building here on the right. So, and it ends pretty much smack dab in the center of this white building right here. So let's just go ahead, and here's the width of the parking, which is about the width of this building right here. So I can just go ahead and draw that in because it goes back to as well. So here's the first parking field and where it would be across the street. And then there's going to be a building, and then there's a second and a third parking field. So just use drawings like this to say, okay, is this what we intend to do? Is this what we want for our community? Is this a good fit? And let's have a design discussion about it. Or, you know, could we get this driveway at least to line up with this driveway so you have a four-way intersection, which is less conflicting than having a bunch of driveway cuts all over the place. You know, find ways to utilize making better design happen, but also understand the cost of all of this parking. So another thing is the roads. I mentioned that earlier. Lancaster, California, we did this analysis. They're up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. Not a great productivity to them, really flat. They've got a tiny downtown. They would kill to have any of your downtowns. But here's their city, which is crazy, is the amount of streets they own. They have 953 miles of streets that they have to maintain, which is basically enough streets to go from Los Angeles to Portland, Oregon. So here they all are built on a timeline. So they had a growth spurt in the early 1900s and they went to sleep for a while. They popped up after World War II, and you can't help but notice all the lane miles that they built in 1953. Well, guess what? When you build all those lane miles post World War II, they come back to haunt you with the first rebuild in 1983. And what they did when they were hit with that huge capital expense is they built more roads. Great, that was your decision. You now have to rebuild this stuff a second time, because this stuff, every 50 years, you have to rebuild those roads, and this comes back with a rebuild of that one. So we just stopped them in 2016, and we're like, let's just see what you're carrying. This is what their road rebuild cycle looks like. So that first mountain was kind of crazy. And then they went ahead and doubled down on it because they're like, hey, Joe, we're not farmers anymore. We all have cars. It's like, all right, well, it's going to get worse and worse over time. And so they can only afford right now 50% of their roads. And this is what's going on in the Sun Belt, but not just there. That we did this analysis in Manchester. Here's the amount of people they had in 1925, 77,000 people, 140 miles of roads. That's about 9.6 feet of road per person. Somehow, citizens of Manchester before World War II could live with about 10 feet of road per person. After that, they grew their population 111,000 people. So they doubled their population, but they added a whole lot more roads and grew it to about 25. So they more than doubled their roads per person. So their population only grew by 44%. Their roads per person grew by 163%. So let's think about this another way. The cost of running a city doubled. The people didn't. The roads cost money. They have this constant diet. So can you afford that is the thing. And oftentimes a developer builds that first road, but then it becomes a community problem from there on out. So just be aware of that. So now what? I've given you a lot of information. Some of it was depressing, some of it hopefully positive. What can you do? Do more analytics. Use this process to just understand policy. One of my favorites in all of this is doing a land value per acre. We didn't do this for the whole state model. I would recommend this is your next step. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. This is just dirt value per acre. This is not, there's no buildings in this image. When I was presenting this in Cheyenne, Wyoming, I was like, hey, what's going on here where everybody's blue, right? That's how you'd expect a neighbor in the neighborhood to look in the upper left up here. Everybody's the same value per acre. But we do this because we're looking for things like this, these anomalies, any kind of like, is that an error or is it a policy? But when I was presenting to the community, I was asking about this blue parcel right here that's $15,000 an acre. And when you cross the street, it doubles in value to 40. And I was presenting to the community, I said, hey, how does land double in value in the same zoning category, same school district, same fire district, everything? And the tax assessor raised her hand and she just belted out. She goes, no, you don't understand. They have more land. The more land you have, the lower the value. Let that wash over you for a second. Land is a limited supply. So when I get a bigger chunk of it, you give me a discount? And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, I've got 3 miles of street around this property. This fella's got 200 feet. She goes, yeah, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. I said, so your money that goes in, you don't care about ever getting it back. She goes, that's not part of our system. So in assessor's defense, that's not their mission. So just, you better realize that the way that we siloed our government, they operate on transactions. And in their world, that makes economic sense. So the reason why I was at the assessors conference was to ask them, and this is their magazine. I was like, is it fair? Is it equitable that you give me a discount when I buy those larger properties? And I showed them the math on this and they're like, no, it's not. And I said, well, where did this standard come from? Did Moses deliver this to you? By the way, they thought this was hilarious. And they're like, no, we don't know. And I'm like, well, can you see how this affects the market? And like, yeah, it's totally going to affect the market. It's going to shift what's going on. That's not equitous. And they're like, you need to talk to Larry. So I talked to this guy, Larry Clark, Larry's awesome. And I pointed this out to him and he's like, yeah, we probably need to change that standard. So realize, like, ask questions, talk to your assessors, change the standards if it's not fair. But realize you got this baked into your system. So we did do the Hillsborough County, which is the Manchester dirt model. And you can see like what's going on here where the dirt in this one neighborhood is so much more than everything else around it, or this one person here. But you can see how the out parcels are more value than the bigger parcels. They have that standard baked in. Learn from your neighbors. You have 15 cities and towns and villages you could learn from. All of them have good things going on. All of them have some problems, some of them more than others. I wouldn't necessarily recommend learning from Pelham. I think they have a lot of sprawl issues down there, given their location. They have some things they can learn from you all with your downtowns. But even learning from larger places that may not necessarily be, we learn from Portsmouth and what they're doing right and wrong and how they're adapting. Portsmouth, we had a conversation about polynucleating the downtowns, actually having more stuff going on over here, that if you're doing well here in the downtown, what can you steal? Can you actually make neighborhood restaurants or neighborhood bars, neighborhood mixed use buildings start to happen in the neighborhoods? And that used to be a traditional New England pattern that neighborhoods used to grow up into their own little micro downtowns. And again, all of these lessons, you have the genetic material to learn from. These are all in Portsmouth. There's a postcard. Our great grandparents used to intuitively know the value of this stuff when they gave it to us in 1905. All these buildings are still here, pulling between 30 and 40 million dollars an acre. More than 100 years after that postcard. And you can look at this building right here that's brand spanking new. It wasn't even in the data set, and it's basically mimicking the old stuff. This stuff's pulling let's call it 29 million an acre. This building is 70 million an acre. Now, yes, it is downtown Portsmouth and there's high value, but realize Portsmouth's been working on this plan for over 25 years, maybe closer to 35 years, trying to revitalize their downtown, and it's working. Adapt your buildings. You've got great architecture all over the place that has slowly adapted over time. Question some of the codes that you have. Will you allow your buildings to retrofit and rehab? These buildings have proven the value over time. Realize that parking is a subsidy. I'm not saying don't have parking, just realize the cost and consequences of that and account for it. Make sure you're writing that down. When people complain that they need more parking, just let them know that it's costing money. And is that best for your community? It may be, But it may also be better to save that money for an after-school program or some park or something else. These are conscious choices, and they have costs. And also that's showing up in your productivity. The reason why these buildings are so inexpensive is because of the architecture, but also because of the massive fields of parking that are sitting fallow most of the time, and that drives down value. Again, it is what it is. It's just asphalt, so it's going to be cheap. And obviously, if you look at the Hanover commercial next to the Hudson commercial, you can see how tight that parking lot is, which is driving up the value. And you can see how low value it gets watered down when you have the larger parking fields. It's pretty simple. And it's also pretty simple to understand where to get more value. And again, you have examples all over the place. Understand the patterns of cost and what you're maintaining as a municipality. So when we talk about, like, let's say if I own a mall, that mall is an asset. It's got things that need to be fixed, like air conditioners. So I have to save money to fix these air conditioners every 20 years or so at $85,000 a pop, but I also have to save about $35,000 to get a crew with a helicopter there to put them on top. That's a cost to owning that asset. Every 15 to 20 years, I need about $205,000. That's the same with this. These roads have a cost. They have a liability that's ongoing. Every 50 years, you have to replace them. So be aware of the cash flow that comes out of buildings, or when you do something like this, a strode, as Chuck Marone calls it, there's a lot of cost there and very little money that comes out of it. So how we develop has a direct connection to your portfolio and how it operates. I'll give you an example that we did in South Bend, Indiana. These are 88 houses done in a traditional grid. These are 88 houses done in a series of cul-de-sacs. And people will say, well, Joe, I like the cul-de-sacs. I don't have any traffic. It's like, all right, well, you're basically pushing all the traffic onto one road, which makes a problem for everybody else. But let's just put it aside and just measure that stuff. So here's the buildings, 88 houses, here's the roads, and what you have to set aside to maintain those roads and the pipes and the stormwater system. So they have to set aside, or should be setting aside, $122,000 for those 88 houses. The revenues coming off those properties will give you about $21,000 in cash flow that would go to that if you took 10% of their total taxes. So that's a deficit of $100,000 for that neighborhood. So that neighborhood is subsidized at $100,000. Single family is subsidized in most communities. Here's the 88 houses in this pattern. So let's do the same thing for them. And let me just jump ahead to the side by side. So basically, this neighborhood's producing pretty much the same amount of property taxes, but its deficit is half. So realize that you're getting you're costing 1.5 times more in this neighborhood, which creates a deficit of 2 times more in the system. So it's not agnostic to say they're the same thing. They are not. They're not just houses. The one on the right is subsidized to the tune of double the one on the left. So how much of that do you have in your community? Measure that stuff. Measure what you own. Understand the cost of the roads and what you have. Do this analysis in each of your communities and see whether or not you can carry this. Again, y'all own it now. I would argue to consider your tax system. This is a statewide model. Y'all can get together and figure out what an appropriate tax is. Why are we taxing on value? Why wouldn't you want to reward me if I build you a brick building? It's like, doesn't mean that I've got more money. It means that I want to invest in my community. And there's a great tax system that was pushed by Henry George in the late 1800s called the land value tax, or the single tax system. He was sort of a rock star of his time, and he thought it was patently unfair that people in Boston, just because they were part of the Copley family and they got there off the Plymouth Landing, that they could just sit on land forever and just bequeath it to their kids. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to pay for the cost of the road, the sidewalk, the police officer that goes by that property. And just because they're not using it, they're taxed really low. He's like, that's unfair. So he thought that you should tax based on use, or what you invested into the property, and then start making conscious choices about what you want to subsidize. But at the very least, you shouldn't subsidize land speculation. So anyway, it spurred a wild movement of proponents for this. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips was a land value tax proponent. I love her eyebrows. But she thought that adults get too set in their ways. They just don't want to change the tax system. So she taught us a game about taxation. This is it. Does it look familiar? That's Monopoly. How do you win at Monopoly? Location, land assembly, and you put a building on it. Like, she taught us these rules. I would just say we need to step back, think like Maggie, and look at our communities and say this. But the first thing you need to do is you need to talk to your state about at least getting the enabling legislation to allow a community to choose a different tax system if they wanted. Why not? It's your community. So I would just argue that y'all should get together, send this up to your state assembly and say, we want the ability to do this if we so choose. Vermont did that a couple years ago, where they have the choice. They don't necessarily do it, but they have the option. So just to close, these are just, we see this like a form of accounting. We're just putting it on a map. And like an accountant, we really don't care. I mean, I care a little bit, but it's your community. We don't care the choices you make. Just live with the consequences, right? But as an accountant, your accountant cares if you can afford if you buy a boat, right? Only if the question they're going to ask you is, can you afford it? If you can afford the boat, the accountant's going to be like, great. If you can't afford the boat, the accountant's going to say something to you. So just make sure you can afford the infrastructure that you buy down and understand it. We've put this stuff on a map so you can see it. Please use these graphics. We hope this helps your community conversations. And just realize it's just a snapshot of today's economics. Keep on doing this as a practice and see how you change. How do you make new growth happen that's in a positive way? And also check the negative stuff. I would recommend Chuck Marone's book, his Strong Towns book. I know that he's been through your community, and I want to thank you for this time. And I know I've gone a little bit over, and thanks for letting us do the math. Are you there?
Hey, thanks, Joe. Can everybody hear me, or can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. All right. This is pretty amazing stuff, and it has elicited some good questions.
Okay.
A couple themes that have come up as people have been putting questions in. One's regional. Our questioners are asking, Claremont, Hanover, Lebanon, these are employment centers, service centers, shopping centers, and therefore they're interdependent with you count them, 20 or 30 small towns around. How do 20 or 30 different corporations, landowning corporations that are towns, use this data in a regional way? And one of the things that emerged there too is especially that we've got this shared challenge of housing availability and affordability around the region. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, there's one is you can sort of actually this model floating up here starts to show that. You could look over at the Manchester Nashua ooze over here. You can clearly see Manchester popping up versus Nashua, but the consequent.
Sorry, maybe I'm not looking, but is your cursor moving on the screen? It is.
Yeah. Can you see it moving right now?
I can. Thank you.
So yeah, here's Manchester, here's Nashua, but because they didn't think in a regional way, what they got is that that kind of slow creep sprawl that they just oozed between them all. Now they should have maybe thought about building a new village or doing something between them. The market's there, but because they didn't have any consequences to going out and taking down a forest and doing like a 12 units of housing here or there, they lost that opportunity to think about new opportunities. I would think as you look at Hanover on the west side. Let me see. I've got an example here. Inside urban design, one of the things that we call it is a polynucleated city. So there's this is an example of one here. This is Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City, Kansas is over here. So this is it's in a new state, it's its own city. You can see it's downtown. Now they did sprawl like crazy over here, but you can still see where their traditional downtown is. If you bring in the Missouri side, they're killing it. And go back to time, this is a downtown that goes back to the 1800s. This area right here it's got a weird name. It's called Country Club Plaza, but it's essentially a new town over here that was part of a streetcar that ran into downtown. And it basically mimicked all of the bones and streetscape and grid, and it grew up to be, well, if you drop this thing in New Hampshire, it would be bigger than Manchester. But it's just a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. You can see another little downtown going on over here, which is next to the hospital. So you can have multiple downtowns, and it's going to produce wealth. It's not going to be for everybody, but you do want to keep track of, as you stretch out and as people move out to other areas, they're going to be like, well, Joe, I want to live out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to hear somebody's dog bark. It's like, all right, well, what's the cost of all of the infrastructure to get you out there? And that's where it's perfectly natural, particularly in New Hampshire, to say, yeah, I want to live on a mountain. We have that here in Asheville, where people are like, I like to live on a mountain. I'm like, are you a logger? Are you a woodsman? I didn't realize that if you're an accountant in the middle of downtown, it's like, why are you trashing my woods? You know, it's like, I'd rather us collectively buy them and we have a preserve and we can all go mountain biking together or whatever. But there's a cost to you driving in and out of those woods every day for plowing, fixing the road, maintaining the road. And we tend to let this be this laissez-faire drive to you qualify kind of thing, where you're just like, well, it's cheaper to live out there. It's like, well, no, it's not really cheaper. We're paying for it. So could we just actively use that investment so we can, you know, discount the cost of a house, pay for affordable housing or something like that, and make it a conscious choice. But it's happening right now as we talk. So when I go around cities, for me, I have like this kind of like X-ray vision where I'm looking for vacant lots, and I'm just like, there should be a house there. There should be a house there. There's, you know, you see like all these opportunities all over the place, and if it's just an empty lot, you're basically paying to service nothing, and it's giving you nothing in taxes. So you're upside down financially. Does that make sense?
I think so. What I'm hearing is look at the costs of living where we do, and
Yeah.
consider how we might invest that differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
That also leads to the who lives where theme that's emerging here. And you know, people said, hey, of course we want value on our land. But does that mean we should get rid of the open space? And you kind of said you love open space. The other part they said is, do we end up pushing out people who have less wealth or lower income, saying you can't live here in this area because we want more value?
Actually, let me show you something. Let's see here. There is a matter of equity in this, but it's also baked into the tax system. This is Asheville for a second here. This is the governor's Western Retreat. So, you know, we're 3 hours away from Raleigh. So we bought the governor a mansion on a mountain, and we're like, please come visit us every once in a while. We'd love to see you because we get treated like dirt by our state capital. So we're doing everything we can to try to work the politics in Asheville. Just down the ridgeline is this house. So on top of the mountain, it's got a tennis court because you need that, right? Who wants to go play tennis with the great unwashed? You want to live on top of a mountain with a tennis court. Y'all do that in New Hampshire, right? Anyway, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that's a rich person. Here's from a Jim Crow era. That's the Jim Crow black grade school when we used to have segregation down here. So this is the old traditional black neighborhood. Here's a house across the street from that grade school with its lovely grounds of 3 trees. This is a low wealth neighborhood. This is my old house when I lived in West Asheville. Those are my dogs. My dogs think they're lions. But we used to do that to freak our neighbors out. But when you look at the tax value, this is 1.4 million with the tennis court. This is my house at 232, and this is the low wealth house. When you take the buildings off the dirt and just look at the dirt per acre, these are the numbers. So when you say these people are low wealth or me at middle income, why are we more productive than the rich person on top of the mountain? When you put the houses back on the buildings, on the lots, and look at the taxes paid per acre, I'm paying the most. I don't have a mountain view. I don't have a 360-degree view where I can watch sunsets and clouds come up. Like, why am I paying the most taxes? So I would just argue that don't let your biases get in the way. Sometimes you'll find small buildings and things that don't look productive are actually highly productive. And then just ask the question of fairness, which is, are we helping individuals with the lowest means to the efficiency and to afford quality of government service? Or are we subsidizing people on top of a mountain to send a plow up there so that they can drive around and get to the grocery store? Meanwhile, we're all picking up the tab for it. So that's something I'd be cautious of. We'd have to look at the individual cases of each of your communities to check that out for whether or not there's fairness going on.
Thank you. Yeah, and in looking at that, there's a question that's come in about the kind of the data that you're showing on the revenue side, that is the value, the productivity. How might we gather the data on the expense side to be able to and then put those things together in a way we can understand what return we're getting and what we're paying to have that, to get that return?
Yeah, that's a little bit more complicated. We obviously couldn't do that in this scope.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll just pull one up. Where's Eugene? You know, a lot of this is just having conversations with your engineering departments. This is Eugene, Oregon, floating in a lake. In the side view of this, what's below the water line is the sunk cost. What's above the water line are the revenues that everybody's paying. Oregon doesn't have retail taxes. They're like you guys, so it's kind of easier to do this. But basically, it's like, all right, these are choices. So this is what's going on in downtown with its production. There's some costly stuff in the downtown, but and the same is true with the suburbs. Here's the revenues coming out of the suburbs. Here's the costs. So if we net your revenues against your costs, you have what's in the black is net positive, what's in the red is net negative, and here's the model. And you can see where the productivity is. So yes, definitely do some stuff downtown. That's really killing it. So find a way to make more of that happen so that you can afford all this subsidy that's out here. The subsidy is not going to go away if you just don't pay attention to it. When you lift this model up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, here's the subsidies, right? So it's not free to live out there, you know? So when people say, well, I don't want to pay taxes, it's like, great, we're putting a toll gate at the end of your road and you're going to pay every time you use that road then. You know, it's like we have this kind of dream reality of what we think government is. It's like, no, somebody's got to pay for that pipe in that road. Somebody's got to pay for that snowplow. Well, that's it. So this is we took a sample of their housing, residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low, medium and high, commercial, mixed use, commercial, low, medium and high. And this is how they net out. This is their sticker prices. So the single family house in their community are averaging about $1,400 an acre of subsidy for that housing type. And people are going to say, well, Joe, I want a yard. I want my kids in a yard to play. It's like, well, great. If you have kids, fine. But for two people, do you really need that? You know, just because you got a dog? I don't know. Or, you know, the folks that are more efficient in townhouses and mixed use buildings, you know, why are they being penalized at more? And secondly, if your housing, single family housing is subsidized, you shouldn't be doing 80% of your land use as that subsidy. And we were having a conversation and I was sort of getting, it was like Friday afternoon. I was like, look, I got to go and I can't be in this meeting anymore because the sun's going down. I got to get on my mountain bike ride. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I had a cheeseburger for lunch. And my rule, because of my heart issues, is when I eat a cheeseburger, I have to go mountain biking and then eat a salad. It's like I have to keep my diet in balance. And they thought that was hilarious. They're like, please use this in the show. But we used it from a standpoint of your community. And this could even be Berlin or Manchester. You have a core, you have the first ring, you have your second ring, your third ring, and your fourth ring. You shouldn't have 90% or 80% of your land use in just these two rings. You need to balance it out. The same way I have to balance my diet. So we're just like, look, do stuff downtown, but notice up here in Crescent Village, here's a little baby downtown starting up. So do more of that, maybe find 4 more spots. And this is what you incentivize. This is where you steer your subsidy for, let's say, the next 5 years or something like that, rather than steer your subsidy into more stuff that's already driving you broke. And people will complain. But if you give people the proper information and show them like, look, this is a fact. We have to pay for this stuff. They may choose like, okay, well, more of us should do this, so we'll pay more. You know, it's just if I know I'm getting something for it, if I know that your charting it. And if you're honest and transparent with the information, you can have a better conversation. Will you win everybody? Certainly not. You know, there's 20% of people that appear to be impervious to data, and it's just like, fine. But when you have 80% of people in the room that get it, they'll be like, okay, we need to move on as a community, you know? So it's just, we're humans, you know, people have biases.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing these great pictures and stories to help us overcome some of those. I'll leave you with the last question. And this kind of goes back to the regional thinking as well. Are you aware of examples, states, counties, where I'll say municipalities, again, treat them as corporations, have been able to work together effectively to do this kind of analysis, and then make decisions about how to react to it. And I ask because the pictures you show are, we might think of downtown Lebanon as the downtown of surrounding towns, downtown Claremont functioning the same way, so or Hanover, and so that means we would need to make some decisions, do some data together or data analysis together, and make some decisions together as surrounding towns and as these larger cities to do some kind of planning and joint thinking. And right now in New Hampshire, got our Lake Sunapee regional planning people on the call. They're an advisory group, and they don't get to say what communities should decide. So
Yeah, I mean, it's at an advisory group, just well, the short answer is yes, they can actually, maybe they should take over this model, bring in the Vermont side while we're at it. We can help if you want. Give us a call. We do this all the time, but it's I would start with, these are the analytic reports that you give the community, and then start coming up with some benchmarks. Will the community always choose the best solution? Like, we all make choices. I eat pizza, I eat cheeseburgers. You saw that in the presentation. These aren't good choices for me, but then I deal with the consequences. So as long as the community's having a fair and honest discussion of, all right, we just pounded down 25 pizzas, and it's on an annual report every year, that sooner or later you're going to deal with that. It's not going to disappear just because you like pizza. And the same is true with suburban development. So the other thing is, where I think is a great lesson is over in Minnesota. And I'll share with you this. They did this thing in the 70s called fiscal disparities. And Minnesotans are awesome. And again, this is very data driven. They do analysis, they do reports. They have a metro government that works with 11 counties to share information and share data, but also share revenue. They have this pretty complicated tax model where, I guess, Minneapolis is their Hanover. It's the big city that's the epicenter that's blowing up. You all already have a good relationship with each other at a collegial level. You're meeting with each other. You're cousins, if you will. You're not in a fight like, let's say, we are with our county or our other cities. So you're at least at that level. But they share revenue where they just basically tax commercial and manufacturing. One of the things that we find with every community, actually this is happening in California right now with Prop 13, people love taxing somebody else. They won't tax themselves. There's this great colonial barb that people used to say back in the colonies of, don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fella behind the tree. Like, it's genetic to Americans to not want to pay taxes. So here's what they did. We just showed them. We're like, all right, well, if you notice this big field of white right here, all those people in white aren't paying into the shared bucket. So you're taxing, this is what gets thrown out of this property in downtown, that 40% haircut gets thrown into a shared bucket. This is what this is what Minneapolis can tax on down here. Well, one of the things that happens when you have low value to start with, taking a 40% haircut of nothing is still nothing is nothing. So you're really taxing the bigger buildings more. But that's what you're doing. So here's what everybody puts in. This is everybody puts into the Christmas fund this much. And Minneapolis was really proud of their contributions and how much they're helping everybody else out. And we're like, well, hold on a second, Minneapolis. This is the giving, this is the taking. So Minneapolis, you also take a whole lot out in the process. But when you net it to what's the net contributions against distributions, this is the big winner, St. Paul. Hey, what's up, St. Paul? You're getting so much more money out of the system than anybody else. And it's because of a quirk in the math. And they didn't, they've been working on with this since the 70s and no one ever made a model of it. This is the top of the model, here's the bottom. So Bloomington is the one that's taking the biggest punch in the face. And it's Bloomington's choice. They chose to just be purely a commercial and manufacturing community. Well, now they're paying dearly for it. So, we showed them they're losing $12 million a year in their contributions. Minneapolis is losing $3 million. Now, in the scale of Minneapolis's budget, $3 million is what they lose in their couch cushions. It's like they're a huge city. But you could set up a regional revenue sharing model where Hanover knows that it's the epicenter because of Dartmouth. Actually in Boston, they have a payment in lieu of taxes for the colleges and universities in Boston to pay a little extra because they're non-taxable. Boston was complaining, or actually, because all these college students show up and they get drunk and they consume police services, and the citizens of Boston are like, we have to pay for that. Like, you're not paying for it, you're non-taxable. So they just worked out an arrangement called payment in lieu of taxes, where the universities kick in a little bit of money to go to community services. That seems fair. There's lots of things you could do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's really helpful to know the models are out there. We don't have to make it up. And I'm glad that we've seen collegial to you. We try to do that together. I'm really grateful for your presentation, Joe, and your observations and this data. I think it's going to help us all. To everybody in the audience, just to let you know that there will be a follow-up email coming your way tomorrow. It's got links to the video recording from this webinar. It's got links to the presentation, the slides Joe has shown. There'll be a survey in there too. We'd appreciate your feedback. And there are 2 more webinars coming up, the Southwest New Hampshire area and the Seacoast, or excuse me, Southern region. So you get a chance to see Joe again if you just can't resist. If you want to sign up for those, go to New Hampshire Housing's website, nhhfa.org, events, and you'll be able to sign up there. And thank you to everybody for attending today's presentation. It's been really, really great to hear all this stuff, Joe. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone.